Hey there, and welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new, hit that subscribe button for spine-tingling Reddit creepypasta stories that are perfect for a night of chilling thrills. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and let's get into tonight's stories. The Ouija board connected us to a dark web user. He knew things about us that we never told anyone. Alright, so before I dive in, I just want to say up front, I'm not really a believer in all that supernatural crap. Ghosts, demons, whatever. It's all just weird stuff that people make up for clicks and cheap thrills. I've always been a skeptic. But I swear, after what happened a few nights ago, I feel like something shifted in the way I see things. And it's messing with me more than I want to admit. It all started as one of those late-night ideas that you regret almost immediately after following through with. You know the kind, right? My roommate Brandon and I were chilling in our tiny apartment. It was one of those boring-ass Friday nights where nobody wanted to go out, so we were just slumped on the couch, scrolling through TikTok and YouTube videos, looking for anything mildly entertaining. That's when Brandon had the brilliant idea to order a Ouija board. I was against it right from the jump. Not because I was scared or anything, like I said, I'm not into that paranormal stuff, but because I thought it was stupid. I figured it'd be another one of those weird for 5 minutes, then boring for the rest of the night kind of deals. But Brandon has this thing where he gets super excited about random ideas and hypes them up until you just go along with it. He pulled up Amazon, ordered a Ouija board, and boom, next day delivery. I'm pretty sure I said something like, "This is the dumbest thing you've ever done." But the truth is, I was kind of curious, not excited, just curious. When the board came, we decided we'd wait until midnight to use it, you know, for the spooky effect. Dumb, I know, but we were bored, and sometimes you just need something weird to break the monotony. Midnight rolled around, and Brandon lit a couple candles he'd stolen from his ex-girlfriend's place. Yeah, he's that guy. We sat down on the floor with the Ouija board between us. Now, neither of us really knew the rules, so Brandon pulled up some YouTube video explaining how you're supposed to open and close the session. I rolled my eyes the whole time. The guy in the video had that fake haunted house enthusiast vibe, like he ran some cringy paranormal channel. But whatever, we figured it couldn't hurt to follow the instructions. Better safe than sorry, right? Okay, Brandon said, cracking his knuckles like we were about to do something intense. Let's see if there are any ghosts in this janky apartment. I laughed. If there are, they're probably as broke as we are. We placed our fingers lightly on the planchette, and I could already feel how awkward this was going to be. There's this unspoken pressure when you use a Ouija board. You don't want to be the one moving it, but at the same time, you kind of want it to move just to make things interesting. So we both sat there, barely touching the damn thing, waiting for something to happen. Nothing. After a couple minutes of dead silence, Brandon grinned. "All right, Mr. Spirit," he said, clearly amused by the whole thing. "If anyone's listening, say something, or, move something." The planchette didn't budge. I was about to call it quits when Brandon got this sly grin on his face. "Let's ask it something personal, something only you and I know." I shrugged. "Like what?" He thought for a moment, then asked, "What's the nickname my mum used to call me when I was a kid?" Now Brandon has this super embarrassing childhood nickname, Bubby. He told me about it once when we were drunk, swearing me to secrecy. It was one of those things you only tell your best friend because you trust they'll never use it against you. There's no way anyone else could know it. We stared at the board, and that's when things started to get weird. The planchette moved. At first, I thought Brandon was messing with me. I gave him the side eye, waiting for that dumb grin of his to appear, but he looked just as confused as I was. The little plastic pointer slid slowly to the letter B, then U-B-B-I-E. I yanked my hand off the planchette, my heart suddenly thumping way harder than it should have been. "Dude, you moved that. Don't play." Brandon looked genuinely freaked out. "I didn't touch it, man." Now, if this were just some random spirit we'd contacted, It would have been creepy enough on its own. But here's where things get worse. Much worse. The board wasn't done. The planchette kept moving, even though we weren't touching it anymore. It spelled out ISEEYOU. Brandon and I locked eyes, and for the first time since we'd started this whole stupid thing, I could tell we were both starting to regret it. But before I could say anything, my phone buzzed on the floor next to me. I picked it up, expecting some random notification, probably Instagram or some spam email. But no, it was a message from an unknown number. The message said, "Isn't Bubby such a cute nickname?" I felt this cold wave of fear wash over me. My mouth went dry, and I could barely get the words out. "Brandon, look at this." He leaned over, reading the message on my screen. His face went pale. "How the hell?" We both stared at the Ouija board, which sat there like it was taunting us. The candles flickered slightly, and the room felt 10 degrees colder all of a sudden. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. This one said, "Don't stop now. We're just getting started." I swear, at that moment, it felt like every sound in the apartment had been sucked into some invisible void. No outside traffic, no hum from the fridge, just total, suffocating silence. Brandon grabbed the board and slammed it shut. "Okay, nope, we're done. This is some serious, messed up Before he could even finish the sentence, my phone buzzed again. A new message. "You shouldn't have closed the board. Now I'm stuck with you. I'm telling you, the blood in my veins felt like ice. I didn't know if this was some elaborate prank, if Brandon was somehow behind it, or if we'd just done something really, really stupid. But one thing was clear. Whoever, or whatever, was messaging me knew things they shouldn't. Things no random person could ever know. And the worst part? This was only the beginning. After Brandon slammed the board shut, I kept staring at my phone, waiting for it to buzz again. You know that sick feeling in your gut when you just know something's not over? Like you shut the door on something bad, but you can feel it scratching to get back in. That's what it felt like sitting in that room. Neither of us said a word for a solid minute. The only sound was the hum of my phone vibrating in my hand. Another message. "I told you, we're just getting started." The smiley face somehow made it worse. "Dude," I muttered. "This isn't funny." Brandon raised his hands defensively. "You think I'm doing this? How could I? I didn't even know the board would move, man. And who the hell would know about Bubby?" He was right. There was no way he could have pulled this off. Brandon's not exactly the type to plan pranks, let alone one this elaborate. He's the kind of guy who forgets his own Netflix password. Another message popped up before I could respond. "I can hear you two talking." I froze. Brandon's face twisted in confusion, and he started pacing the room, muttering, "This can't be real. This can't be real." Meanwhile, I just sat there, phone clutched in my hand like it might explode. Then another message came through. "How's the candle smell? Is it lavender?" The blood drained from my face. I looked down at the candle, one of those basic lavender-scented ones. No way. Number freaking. Wait. Brandon, it knows what candle we're using. He stopped pacing and shot me this look like, "What the hell are you saying, man?" I held the phone out to show him the text. His expression changed from confused to downright terrified. "Okay," he said, more to himself than to me. "We're dealing with some hacker or stalker. That's gotta be it. Maybe someone's watching us through our phones or..." He didn't even get to finish his sentence before my phone buzzed again. "No cameras, Brandon. Just me." I swear to God, I nearly threw my phone across the room. Brandon looked like someone had just dumped a bucket of ice water over his head. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "Okay," I whispered, trying to sound calm even though my heart was pounding in my chest. "Okay, someone's screwing with us. It's a prank." It's gotta be a prank. Brandon's hands were shaking as he pointed at the board. We need to open it again. Close it properly. No way, I said, shaking my head. That thing is going in the trash. Did you not see the videos? If you close it wrong, you're supposed to... Before he could finish, my phone vibrated one more time. We both flinched. I didn't want to look, but I had to. The message on the screen made my stomach drop. It's too late for that. Then, the Wi-Fi cut out. Just like that. Boom. Gone. Our phones switched to LTE, and even then, the signal was weak. No way to call anyone, no way to Google what the hell was going on. Brandon's eyes went wide. What the hell do you mean, too late? He whispered, almost like he was scared whoever, or whatever, was behind the texts could still hear him. I was about to respond when the apartment lights flickered. Not a power surge or anything. It was more like someone was standing by the switch, flipping it off and on. But we were alone in that room. I know we were. We both sat there, completely frozen, until the lights stopped flickering and stayed on. Then the phone buzzed again. I stared down at the screen, hands shaking. Look at the window. I didn't want to. I really didn't want to. But there's this morbid curiosity that kicks in during moments like that, you know? Like you know you're about to see something bad, but you can't stop yourself from looking. Brandon was already moving toward the window, breathing heavy. If this is a prank, it's the most elaborate one ever, he muttered under his breath. He pulled back the curtain. Nothing. Just the empty street outside, dimly lit by the street lamp. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. But then, I noticed something. There was a car parked across the street. No big deal, right? Except the headlights were off, and the windows were tinted too dark to see inside. It just felt off, you know. Like whoever was sitting in that car had been there longer than they should have been. Brandon must have noticed it too, because he pulled the curtain shut in a panic. Okay, he whispered. We need to go. Now. I nodded. We both scrambled to our feet, grabbing our phones and shoes. I was halfway to the door when my phone buzzed one more time. Against my better judgment, I glanced at the screen. You can't run from me. I felt like the walls were closing in. Brandon was already throwing on his hoodie, his movements frantic. I didn't blame him. My instincts were screaming at me to get the hell out of that apartment. We bolted for the door. I yanked it open so hard I thought the handle would rip off. But the second we stepped into the hallway, we froze. The elevator at the end of the hall dinged. The doors slid open and someone stepped out. A man, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses, even though it was the middle of the night. He moved slowly, deliberately, like he knew exactly where he was going. And he was coming straight toward us. Brandon whispered, "Who the hell is that?" But I already knew. I didn't know how, but I just knew. It was him. The person, thing, we had somehow contacted through the Ouija board. He had crossed from wherever he was, and now, he was here. Brandon grabbed my arm, yanking me back into the apartment. "Lock it! Lock the door!" he shouted, slamming it shut behind us. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking so badly I could barely twist the deadbolt. I finally got it locked, and we stood there in the dark, pressed against the door, breathing like we'd just run a marathon. Then came the knock. One soft knock. Just once. Then my phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look at it. I really didn't want to, but I knew I had to. The message was simple. Let me in. We stood there, backs pressed against the door, as if that flimsy piece of wood was the only thing keeping us alive. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard it felt like it was trying to break free. Brandon's breathing was shallow and rapid, like he'd just finished sprinting 10 miles, and I wasn't much better. The knock came again. Just once. Not loud, not aggressive. Just a slow, deliberate tap that somehow sounded worse than if someone had pounded their fist against the door. Brandon's hand clamped down on my arm, way too tight. "What the hell do we do?" he whispered, voice cracking. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My brain was screaming for a solution, something to make this stop, to get us out of whatever nightmare we'd stepped into, but there was nothing. The door didn't feel like enough of a barrier between us and whoever or whatever was out there. Then my phone buzzed again, and Brandon winced at the sound. I didn't want to look at it. I swear I almost threw it across the room. But something inside me whispered that ignoring it would only make things worse. The message was waiting on the screen. "I'm patient, I can wait." The words felt like acid in my chest. I showed the message to Brandon, and the look on his face told me he was just as terrified as I was. Neither of us said anything for a few seconds, like we were both too scared to break the silence. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a photo. I opened it with a sick feeling twisting in my gut. The photo showed us, me and Brandon, right here in the apartment, standing exactly how we were now, backs pressed against the door. The angle was just slightly off, as if the picture had been taken through the peephole. My stomach flipped. Someone was right outside watching us. Brandon saw the picture over my shoulder and lost it. "Nope! No way! We're getting out of here!" He bolted toward the window, yanking the curtain open with enough force to almost rip it down. He unlocked the window and started pulling it open, but I grabbed his arm. "Are you insane? We're on the 4th floor." "I'd rather break my legs than stay in here," he shot back, his voice shaky. And honestly, I wasn't sure I disagreed. Before either of us could make a decision, the door handle started to rattle. Slowly at first, then harder. Someone, or something, was trying the knob, testing the lock. Brandon cursed under his breath, stepping back from the door like it might burst open at any second. I could feel my throat closing up, the air suddenly too thick to breathe. Then came another message on my phone. "I told you, it's too late to leave." Brandon was shaking his head, pacing again. "This doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. How the hell did we get here, man?" I wanted to scream at him that I didn't know. I didn't understand any of it. We'd messed with the Ouija board for 15 minutes. 15 minutes. And now this. How the hell had things gone from stupid fun to absolute terror so fast? The door handle stopped rattling, but that somehow made it worse. The silence pressed down on us, thick and suffocating. Then the knocking started again, except this time it wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the walls, a slow, deliberate tap, 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 like someone was inside the walls, just waiting for us to crack. It moved around us, the sound shifting from one side of the room to the other, as if whoever, or whatever, it was wanted us to know that there was nowhere to run. Brandon lost it. He ran into the kitchen, yanking drawers open, throwing stuff around. "We need a weapon," he muttered. "We need to fight back." But how the hell do you fight something that sends you photos of yourself through the peephole and knocks from inside the damn walls? I was still trying to wrap my head around it when my phone buzzed again. This time, the message was different. "Are you ready to play another game?" Brandon was still tearing through the kitchen, muttering curses under his breath, when the lights flickered again. Then, with a loud click, the power went out completely. We were plunged into total darkness. "Brandon," I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath. I could hear him moving around, bumping into furniture, swearing softly. "Brandon, stop. Just stop." And then, the scariest thing happened. A voice, not through the phone, not through the walls, but inside the room. It whispered, low and soft. "You shouldn't have played." I felt every hair on my body stand on end. The voice wasn't coming from any specific direction. It was just there, everywhere at once, filling the room like smoke. I could barely see Brandon's outline in the dark, but I knew he'd heard it too, because he went dead still. Then my phone screen lit up again. Another photo. I didn't want to open it, but I knew I had to. I tapped the message, and the photo filled my screen. It showed the two of us again. But this time, it wasn't taken from the peephole. This time, it was taken from inside the room. We were standing exactly as we were now, in total darkness, the faint glow from my phone lighting up our terrified faces. And behind us, in the photo, there was a figure. A tall, shadowy figure standing just inches away from Brandon. Its face, if you could even call it that, was a blurry mess, like someone had smudged charcoal over its features. But I could see the eyes. God, I could see the eyes. They were dark, empty, and somehow smiling. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just stared at the photo, my hands trembling so hard the phone nearly slipped from my grip. Brandon whispered, "What is it?" His voice was barely audible, like he was afraid the thing in the photo might answer. I couldn't respond. All I could do was turn the phone around and show him. He let out a strangled noise, half a scream, half a sob, and stumbled back, crashing into the wall. "What the hell is that? What the hell is that?" And then, the thing in the photo, it moved. I swear to God, it moved. The photo on my screen shifted, the figure's blurry head tilting ever so slightly, as if it knew we were watching. Then the phone went black. Brandon grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the door. "We need to go. Now." We fumbled with the lock, hearts hammering, every second stretching out into eternity. I could feel it. Whatever was in the room with us, watching, waiting. Finally, the lock clicked. We yanked the door open, practically falling into the hallway. Brandon slammed the door behind us, and we sprinted for the stairs, not daring to look back. As we stumbled down the stairs, panting and tripping over ourselves, my phone buzzed one last time. I didn't want to look, but I had to. The message was simple. "I'll find you." We didn't stop running until we were out of the building, gasping for breath in the cold night air. Brandon bent over, hands on his knees, struggling to suck in oxygen. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that shadowy figure standing at the entrance of our building, just watching us. But there was no one. Nothing. The street was eerily quiet. Too quiet for the city. No passing cars. No distant hum of life. Just the two of us, standing in the middle of the street, shaking from fear and exhaustion. "We need to call someone," Brandon whispered, panic still thick in his voice. "The cops. Or, somebody. Anybody." I pulled out my phone and tried dialing 911. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hit the numbers. The line rang. Once, twice, then a click. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, praying I'd hear an operator's voice. Instead, what I heard chilled me to the bone. It was that same voice from before, the one that whispered in the apartment. "I told you, you can't run." My heart stopped. I yanked the phone away from my ear like it was on fire, staring at the screen. No caller ID, no connection, just that voice. Brandon must have seen the look on my face. What? What did they say? I couldn't even answer. My hand shook as I turned the phone around to show him the screen. The call was still connected, but there was no information. Just a blank screen with the words "Call active" glowing faintly at the top. Without a word, Brandon grabbed the phone from me and threw it as hard as he could into the street. It shattered on impact, the sound echoing down the empty block like a gunshot. We stood there, panting in the cold, trying to figure out what to do next. The air felt heavy, like the night itself was watching us, waiting for us to make the next move. "We need to get somewhere safe," I muttered, barely believing the words as they left my mouth. "Somewhere public, with people." Brandon nodded quickly. Yeah, let's go to the diner on 8th. It's always open, right?" It was a terrible plan, but it was the best we had. At least the diner would have lights, other people, maybe even some cameras. something to make us feel less exposed. We started walking fast, almost jogging, heads on swivels the entire time. Every passing shadow looked like it was shifting. Every distant noise felt like it was coming closer. I kept expecting my broken phone, to somehow buzz in my pocket again. That's how deep into my head this thing had gotten. The diner wasn't far, but the walk felt like it took hours. I swear, the streets around us looked different, like they'd stretched longer, or like certain corners were folding in on themselves. Maybe it was the fear messing with my perception, or maybe something was actually wrong with the world around us. When we finally reached the diner, the lights were on, and I felt a flicker of relief. There were a few cars parked outside, the neon sign buzzing faintly in the window. We rushed through the door, the little bell above it jingling as we stumbled in. The place was almost empty. Just a bored waitress behind the counter, scrolling on her phone, and a guy in the corner booth nursing a cup of coffee. The smell of cheap bacon grease and burnt toast hit me like a slap, grounding me for the first time in hours. We slid into a booth near the back, keeping our backs to the wall so we could see the door. Brandon kept wringing his hands together, glancing around the room like he expected the shadow from the photo to walk right through the entrance. "What the hell do we do now?" he whispered, voice hoarse. I had no idea. My brain was still spinning, trying to make sense of everything. All I knew was that we couldn't go back to the apartment. We couldn't go anywhere alone. The waitress came over, chewing gum, looking like she couldn't care less about the two freaked-out guys sitting in her booth. "What'll it be?" she asked, smacking her gum. Coffee," Brandon stammered. "2 coffees, please." She nodded, jotting it down on her little notepad, and walked off. I noticed Brandon's leg bouncing uncontrollably under the table. Mine probably was too. Then, my phone buzzed. My heart stopped. I stared at my pocket, mind racing. That phone was supposed to be broken. We saw it shatter in the street, pieces flying everywhere. There was no way it could be buzzing right now. Slowly, I reached into my pocket. My hands felt ice cold. I pulled out the phone. The screen was cracked, spiderwebbed beyond repair, but somehow, it was still on. The same unknown number popped up with a notification. One new message. I glanced at Brandon, my throat so dry I could barely swallow. He just shook his head, eyes wide with fear. I tapped the message. It was a picture. The booth we were sitting in, taken from behind us. I dropped the phone on the table like it had burned me. Brandon leaned over, took one look at the photo, and went pale as a ghost. "How the hell?" he whispered. I could feel the room shifting again, like the walls were slowly pressing in on us. My skin crawled with the overwhelming sense that we weren't alone, that whoever had been playing with us wasn't finished yet. Then, the bell above the diner door jingled. We both looked up, hearts in our throats. A man walked in. He wore a hoodie, pulled low over his face, and dark sunglasses, even though it was the middle of the night. It was him. I knew it in my bones before I even saw his face. Something about the way he moved, slow and deliberate, felt exactly like the shadow in the photo. Brandon's hand gripped my arm under the table, hard enough to hurt. "We need to go," he whispered. "Now." The man in the hoodie took a seat at the counter, not looking at us. But I knew, somehow, that he was aware of us. He was waiting. I glanced at the door, weighing our options. If we ran, he'd follow us. I was sure of it. But staying here didn't feel any safer. Before we could move, my phone buzzed again on the table, the cracked screen lighting up. Another message. "You'll never leave." I shoved the phone into my pocket, heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. Brandon was already sliding out of the booth, moving toward the door like his life depended on it. We made it halfway across the diner before the man in the hoodie stood up. I swear time slowed down. The bell jingled again as we hit the door and bolted into the street. We didn't stop running, not even when we heard footsteps behind us. We sprinted down the street, lungs burning, shoes slapping against the pavement. Every shadow felt like it was stretching toward us, reaching out with invisible hands to drag us down. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel it, the presence of that man, or whatever the hell he was, right behind us. Brandon pulled ahead, and I struggled to keep up, my legs heavy and clumsy. The sound of footsteps behind us never slowed. They were steady, like whoever was chasing us wasn't tired, wasn't even human. Just a relentless, unfeeling thing following us into the night. We ducked down an alley, hoping to lose him, but the second we turned the corner, I knew we'd made a mistake. The alley was a dead end. Brandon skidded to a stop, hands on his head, breathing like he was about to hyperventilate. No, no, no! This can't be happening! I spun around, expecting to see the man standing at the mouth of the alley, but there was nothing. Just the dark, empty street beyond. No footsteps, no sign of anyone. That should have been a relief, but it wasn't. If anything, the silence was worse. Brandon was pacing in tight circles, pulling at his hair. We're screwed, man. We're so screwed. He's just playing with us. This is a game to him. I leaned against the wall, trying to think, trying to make sense of it all. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, the cracked screen flickering as it lit up. I didn't want to check it, but I knew I had to. There was a new message waiting. Almost over. I showed the screen to Brandon, and he let out a choked laugh, the kind you make when you're way past scared. He's messing with us, he whispered. He's going to drag this out until... Before he could finish, something shifted at the far end of the alley. A shadow, long and tall, stretching across the pavement like it didn't belong to anything human. It moved slowly toward us, sliding along the walls, creeping closer inch by inch. Then, just as it reached the edge of the light, he appeared. The man in the hoodie. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. His face was still hidden beneath the hood, but I could feel his eyes on me, those same empty, smudged eyes from the photo. Brandon backed away, hands up like that would do anything to stop him. "What do you want?" he shouted, voice cracking. The man didn't answer. He just kept walking toward us, closing the distance inch by inch. I grabbed Brandon's arm, desperate. "We have to fight him." "With what?" Brandon snapped, panic making his voice rise. "We've got nothing." The man was almost on us now, just a few feet away. I could feel this suffocating pressure in the air, like the alley was shrinking around us, trapping us in place. Then he stopped. The man tilted his head as if studying us. Then slowly, he reached into his pocket. I braced myself, expecting a knife, a gun, something awful. But what he pulled out was worse. It was my phone, the one Brandon had smashed in the street. It was perfectly intact, screen glowing faintly in the dim alley light. He held it out to me, like he was offering a gift. Brandon whispered, "What the hell?" I didn't want to take it. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to do anything but touch that phone. But something inside me knew that if I didn't take it, things would only get worse. With a shaky hand, I reached out and took the phone from him. The screen flickered once, then lit up with a new message. "Game over." The man smiled then, just a slight curve of the mouth beneath the shadow of his hood. And that's when I realized. He wasn't just some random stalker or hacker. He was something else. Something that had come through the Ouija board. And now that I'd taken the phone, he didn't need to follow us anymore, because he was already inside. I looked at Brandon and I saw the realization hit him too, the same sick understanding twisting his face. And then the phone buzzed one last time. "See you soon." The man in the hoodie took a step back, melting into the shadows as if he'd never been there at all. The alley was empty again, like nothing had ever happened, but it didn't matter. I could feel it. He was with us now. Wherever we went, whatever we did, he'd be there, waiting. We didn't speak as we stumbled out of the alley, too numb to think, too scared to plan. We just walked, side by side, down the empty street, knowing that no matter where we went, he'd find us. And the worst part? This wasn't over. Not really. Because deep down, I knew, just like Brandon did, that this wasn't the kind of game you could win. It was the kind you only survived if you were lucky. We asked the Ouija board about our house's history. It gave us names. Then the news confirmed it. I've never really believed in paranormal stuff. Ghost stories are fun to hear when you're hanging out late at night with friends, but I always figured there's usually some logical explanation. That's why I didn't think twice when we moved into an old rental house at the edge of town, a house I'd later learn had more history than we bargained for. The place was cheap, and that was reason enough to sign the lease. My girlfriend Megan and I had just moved in together, and between student loans and part-time jobs, we weren't exactly rolling in cash. So, when we found this 3-bedroom house listed way below market price, we thought we'd hit the jackpot. It was a little rundown, creaky floors, some weird stains on the walls, but it had a certain old-school charm. The only weird thing at the start was the basement door. It didn't have a key, and the landlord told us not to worry about it. Just a utility space, he said. The kind of thing you hear and immediately forget because, honestly, who cares? But looking back now, that locked basement was probably the first red flag. The real trouble started a few weeks after we moved in. Megan had this idea that we should connect with the house's energy. She's into crystals and tarot readings, which I think is kind of cool in a harmless way. But then she suggested we try a Ouija board. And I don't know what possessed me to say yes. Maybe boredom, maybe just curiosity. But I went along with it. We didn't even buy a real Ouija board. Megan found some weird printable version online. It was free. All you had to do was print the letters and glue them to cardboard. Very DIY. We set it up in the living room with a shot glass as the planchette. I remember the vibe being light at first. Like, we were giggling and not taking it seriously at all. Megan put on some ambient music, and we dimmed the lights for maximum spooky vibes. Her words, not mine. We started the session the way every corny horror movie does. Is there anyone here with us? The shot glass didn't move. I mean, obviously. We tried a few more basic questions, like, what's your name? And how old are you? Still nothing. After a while, we were about to give up when Megan asked, does this house have a history we should know about? And that's when the shot glass moved. Just a little at first, like it could have been our fingers. But then it shot across the board to land on YES, so fast that Megan yelped and pulled her hand away. I laughed. You pushed that, I said. No, I swear I didn't, she said, looking genuinely freaked out. That's when things started getting weird. Megan asked another question, her voice quieter now. What happened here? The glass slid across the board again. This time it spelled out something slowly. DEATH. Megan looked at me with wide eyes, but I tried to brush it off. It's just a coincidence, I said. We're both probably nudging it without realizing. But inside, I felt this tight, creeping sensation in my chest, like something wasn't right. Whose death? Megan asked next. Her hand was trembling, but she kept it on the glass. The answer came faster this time. The shot glass moved smoothly, confidently, like whoever or whatever was controlling it knew exactly what it wanted to say. JEFF. We stared at the board, confused. The name didn't mean anything to either of us. Just as I was about to say we should stop, the glass moved again, spelling out another name. CAROL. The room felt heavier, like the air had thickened somehow. Megan looked pale now. Do you know these people? She asked me. No, I whispered, and I was starting to wish I'd never agreed to this whole thing. There was one final question. Megan asked, her voice almost too quiet to hear. What do you want from us? The shot glass sat still for a moment, and I thought for a second that maybe it was over. But then it moved, slowly at first, picking up speed. L-O-O-K. "Look where?" Megan asked, her voice shaky, and the glass answered, N-E-W-S. At that point, we stopped. I practically threw the shot glass across the room. We sat in silence for a few minutes, just staring at each other, trying to make sense of what just happened. Megan kept saying over and over, "I didn't push it. I swear I didn't push it." And honestly, I believed her, because I hadn't pushed it either. We packed up the board, shoved it into the back of a closet, and tried to laugh it off, but it didn't feel funny anymore. We were both pretty rattled, and I remember Megan saying, "It was just a stupid game, right?" I nodded. "Yeah, just a stupid game." Except the weirdness didn't stop there. In fact, that's when things got a lot worse. The rest of that night was weirdly quiet. Megan and I didn't talk much after the Ouija board thing, just kind of tiptoed around each other, both pretending we were totally fine. But we weren't. I could tell by the way Megan kept glancing at the closet where we'd shoved the board, and how she jumped every time the house made one of those old building creaks. I went to bed telling myself I'd forget about it in the morning. Maybe we'd laugh about it later, talk about how we'd freaked ourselves out over nothing. I was this close to convincing myself it really was just a dumb game, until I woke up in the middle of the night. It was around 3 a.m, and the house felt different. You know that feeling when you wake up, and for a second you don't know what's wrong, but your body knows something isn't right? Yeah. It was one of those moments. The bedroom was pitch black, but something felt off. Megan was still asleep beside me, breathing softly. I laid there for a few minutes, trying to figure out what had woken me. Then I heard it. A faint scratching noise. It was coming from the wall right behind our bed. At first, I thought it might be a mouse or something. The house was old. Maybe we had pests. I tried to ignore it, but the sound kept going. Long, deliberate scratches, like nails dragging across the wall. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. The noise stopped instantly, as if whatever was making it knew I was awake. I held my breath, waiting to hear it again. But there was nothing. Just the low hum of silence pressing down on the room. I wanted to wake Megan, but something told me not to. I don't know why, but the idea of saying anything out loud felt dangerous, like acknowledging it would make things worse. So, I laid back down, staring at the ceiling, every muscle in my body tense, and eventually drifted off into a restless sleep. In the morning, I figured maybe I dreamed the whole thing. It happens, right? You wake up, hear a weird noise, and your brain turns it into something bigger than it is. That was the logical explanation. Except the next day, Megan found the scratches. She was cleaning the bedroom when I heard her call my name. "Babe, you need to see this." I walked in, and she was standing by the headboard, looking at the wall. There were 3 long, thin scratches carved into the plaster. They looked old, like they'd been there for years. The weird part, they were exactly where I'd heard the noise the night before. "That's creepy," I said, trying to sound casual. "You think?" Megan shot me a look. She wasn't buying my chill act, and honestly, neither was I. We stared at the scratches for a while, both of us trying to come up with some reasonable explanation. Maybe the previous tenants had a cat or something. That made sense, right? Except Megan checked the rental agreement later that day. No pets allowed. It was the kind of thing that sticks with you, you know. Not huge or dramatic, just unsettling enough to make you feel uneasy. We kept telling ourselves it was nothing, but it was like the house knew. And then the weird noises started. At first it was just little things. The occasional bump in the night, footsteps on the stairs when no one was there. But soon it escalated. One night, I woke up to the sound of something heavy being dragged across the living room floor. I rushed out of bed, thinking someone had broken in, but the room was empty. Nothing had been moved. Another night, Megan swore she heard someone whisper her name right in her ear. She thought it was me messing with her until she turned over and saw I was fast asleep. We tried to brush it off. Old houses make noises, right? That's just what they do. But the thing that really got to me happened about a week after the Ouija board session. It was a Sunday night, and I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone while Megan was in the kitchen making tea. Out of nowhere, the lights flickered, and for a second, everything went dead silent. Not just in the house, outside too. Like someone had hit the mute button on the entire neighborhood. And then, I heard it. A voice. It came from the other side of the living room, near the closet where we'd stashed the Ouija board. It was faint, like someone whispering from behind a door. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded angry. I froze, my phone slipping from my hand. Megan walked in just as the whispering stopped. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked, her voice low. I started, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to sound crazy. "I think we should get rid of that board," I said instead. Megan nodded, like she'd been thinking the same thing. The next morning, we drove the board out to a nearby park and dumped it in the trash. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. A couple of days later, Megan was scrolling through the local news on her phone when she gasped. "You need to see this," she said, her voice shaky. She handed me the phone, and I stared at the article on the screen. Murder victims from 1987 identified through cold case investigation. Below the headline were the names, Jeff and Carol Thompson. I felt like the ground had just dropped out from under me. Jeff and Carol, the same names the Ouija board had given us. The article said they'd been a young couple who went missing back in the 80s. Their bodies were found buried under a house. Our house. That basement door we couldn't open. Yeah, that's where they'd been buried. I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. Megan looked as pale as a ghost. "It can't be a coincidence," she whispered. And here's the part that keeps me awake at night. The article mentioned that the Thompsons had been killed by someone they knew, someone they trusted. The police never found the murderer. And the last sentence of the article. The killer was never caught. His identity remains unknown to this day. After Megan found that article, it felt like the temperature in the house dropped 10 degrees. I don't mean physically, though, come to think of it, the house was getting colder, but more like the kind of chill that crawls under your skin and doesn't go away. It was like knowing the truth about the house made it aware of us, and things only got worse from there. We talked about moving out that same night. Megan was practically begging me to start looking for a new place, but our lease still had 6 months on it, and the landlord wasn't exactly the refund your deposit type. So, we decided to stick it out, hoping the weirdness would blow over if we just ignored it. Spoiler, it didn't. The day after Megan found that article, the noises kicked up a notch. It wasn't just scratching or bumps in the night anymore. Now, it was the unmistakable sound of furniture being dragged, loud, deliberate, as if someone was rearranging the entire living room at 2 a.m. But here's the thing, when we'd go downstairs to check, nothing was out of place. Not a single chair moved, not a pillow out of place. Megan started sleeping with earplugs. I started sleeping with the lights on. And neither of us wanted to talk about what we both knew deep down. Something had been disturbed, and it wasn't going to let us off the hook that easily. Then, 2 nights later, I saw it. I had been lying in bed, scrolling through my phone in the dark, when I got that same feeling I'd had before, the one where the air shifts and you know you're not alone. I tried to ignore it at first. Megan was asleep beside me, and the room was quiet, but I could feel this weird pressure building, like something was about to happen. And then I saw movement in the hallway. It was just a shadow at first, one of those quick flickers that you think could be your imagination. But then it came back. a tall, thin silhouette standing at the edge of the doorway. It didn't move like a person, though. It stood completely still, like it was waiting for something. Watching. I tried to wake Megan, but my voice got caught in my throat. It felt like I was paralyzed, my whole body frozen under the weight of that thing's presence. I couldn't look away, and the longer I stared, the clearer it became. It was a man, or at least something shaped like a man. I couldn't see his face, just the outline of his head and shoulders against the dark hallway. But I could feel the cold radiating off him, and the air smelled sour, like wet dirt. And then he moved. He took a step forward, slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. His footsteps didn't make a sound. I tried again to scream, to move, to do anything, but my body wouldn't listen. And just when he was about to step fully into the room, he vanished, just gone, like he'd never been there. The second he disappeared, I could move again. I bolted upright, gasping for air, and shook Megan awake. She looked groggy and confused, but the second she saw my face, her expression changed. "What happened?" she asked, sitting up. I told her everything, about the shadow, the cold, the way it felt like I couldn't move. Megan didn't say anything for a long time. She just stared at the doorway, her lips pressed into a tight line. Finally, she whispered, "I think it knows we know." The next day, we decided to call the landlord. We figured, at the very least, he should know about the history of the house. Maybe he could tell us why the basement door was locked, or if the police had ever reached out to him about the Thompsons. When we finally got through to him, his reaction made my skin crawl. "Oh," he said, sounding almost bored. "Yeah, I meant to tell you about that. Guess it slipped my mind." Slipped his mind? What the hell? I asked him why the basement was locked, and he got weirdly defensive. "That's not part of the rental. Just stay out of there. It's better that way." That answer wasn't good enough for me. After everything we'd seen, I needed to know what was down there. But before I could press him further, he hung up. Megan was pacing back and forth in the living room, chewing on her thumbnail. "We need to open that door," she said, more to herself than to me. "Are you out of your mind?" I asked. "The basement is exactly where we don't need to go." But Megan wasn't listening. "What if the answers are down there? What if we can fix this?" She had that determined look in her eye that told me there was no talking her out of it. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. That night, we were going to try and open the basement door. We waited until midnight. Not because it was the witching hour or any of that crap, but because it just felt right, like if we were going to confront whatever was in this house, we had to do it when the house was at its most still. I grabbed a screwdriver from the kitchen drawer, and Megan followed me down the hallway to the basement door. The air was cold, and I swear I could hear faint scratching noises coming from behind the door. The lock was old and rusty, and it took me a few minutes to pry it open. When the latch finally gave way with a loud snap, I almost wished it hadn't. The door swung open slowly, revealing a steep set of stairs leading down into the dark. The smell hit us immediately, a thick, musty odor, like wet concrete and rotting wood. Megan turned on her phone's flashlight, and we made our way down, one slow step at a time. The further we went, the colder it got, and then, at the bottom of the stairs, we saw it. The basement wasn't empty. There were piles of old, dusty furniture shoved against the walls, along with cardboard boxes filled with what looked like personal belongings. Clothes, photo albums, children's toys. But what caught my eye was the far corner of the room. There was a patch of dirt that looked disturbed. The concrete floor around it was cracked, as if someone had broken it open and tried to cover it back up in a hurry. And right next to the disturbed patch of dirt was something that made my blood run cold. A shovel. A shovel, covered in dirt, just lying there, like someone had left it behind in the middle of digging. Megan stepped closer to the patch of dirt, shining her flashlight over it. And that's when we saw them. Scratches. 3 long, thin scratches carved into the concrete around the disturbed patch of earth. The same scratches we'd found on the wall in our bedroom. And then, from somewhere deep within the basement, we heard it. A low, shuffling sound, like someone or something moving through the dark. Megan grabbed my arm and we both bolted up the stairs without a second thought. We slammed the basement door shut and shoved a chair under the handle, panting and shaking as if we'd just run a marathon. We didn't say a word to each other. We didn't need to, because whatever we had disturbed down there, it wasn't finished with us yet. After what we found in the basement, we knew we were in deep. I kept telling myself that maybe it was just an old patch of dirt, that the scratches on the floor could have been from anything. But Megan and I both knew the truth. Something had been buried down there, and whatever it was, it didn't stay buried. We didn't sleep that night. We sat in the living room with every light on, clutching our phones like they were lifelines. Every small noise made us jump. The creak of the floorboards, the wind rattling the windows, even the hum of the refrigerator, they all felt sinister now, like the house was breathing around us. Around 3 a.m., we heard it. A soft, slow thump from the basement door. Megan clutched my arm so hard it hurt. "It's coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The thumping came again, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of the door handle rattling. Whatever was down there was trying to get in. "We need to leave," Megan hissed, her nails digging into my arm. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't move. I don't know why. It was like my brain couldn't process what was happening fast enough. This kind of thing doesn't happen in real life. It's the stuff of movies, stories, internet horror threads, not something you actually live through. The rattling stopped. For a moment, the house was completely silent. I dared to hope, just for a second, that maybe it had given up. And then, from the other side of the door, we heard the most chilling sound imaginable. It laughed, a soft, breathy laugh, like someone trying to hold in a giggle. It sounded so wrong. It wasn't angry. It wasn't mocking. It was like it was genuinely amused by our fear, like it was playing with us. Megan slapped her hand over her mouth to keep from screaming, and I felt my stomach drop. The thing on the other side of that door wasn't just some spirit or restless ghost. It was worse. Something far worse. Before I could think of what to do next, we heard the sound of the basement door unlocking. Not with a key, but with a slow, deliberate click, as if the lock had never been broken at all. The handle turned. I grabbed Megan's hand and we bolted for the front door, but as I fumbled with the lock, we heard the unmistakable sound of slow, heavy footsteps coming up the basement stairs. One step, then another. It was taking its time. The front door wouldn't open. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get the key to turn. Megan was sobbing now, clutching my arm and begging me to hurry. Behind us, the basement door creaked open. I turned just for a second, and I saw it, standing at the top of the stairs, half hidden in shadow. It was the same figure I'd seen in the hallway, tall, thin, its features impossible to make out. But there was one thing I could see clearly, its hand. It was dragging its long, bony fingers along the wall, leaving 3 deep scratches in the paint, just like the ones we'd found in the bedroom. The figure tilted its head, as if it was studying us. Then it did something that chilled me to my core. It waved. Not a friendly wave, more like an invitation, as if it was telling us, "Go ahead, run. I'll find you." The key finally turned. The front door flew open, and we ran. We didn't stop until we were in the car, peeling out of the driveway like our lives depended on it. We spent the night at a friend's apartment, both of us too shaken to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure in the doorway, its hand dragging along the wall. In the morning, we decided we had to go back. Not to stay, just to grab our stuff and get out for good. I couldn't stomach the idea of leaving everything behind. but I also knew we couldn't stay in that house another night. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. It was the same building, but there was something off about it, like it had been waiting for us to return. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was eerily quiet, and the air felt heavy, like it had been holding its breath. Everything was exactly where we'd left it, but there was something new, something we couldn't ignore. The walls. Every wall in the house, upstairs, downstairs, even the ceilings, was covered in scratches. 3 long, deep gouges carved into the plaster, as if someone had dragged their nails across every inch of the place. Megan stood frozen in the doorway, her hand covering her mouth. I could hear her breathing hard, on the verge of a panic attack. "We need to go," she whispered. "We can't stay here." She was right. But as we turned to leave, something stopped us. The basement door swung open, slowly, almost casually, and out stepped the figure. It wasn't a shadow this time. It was real. Its skin was pale, stretched too tight over its bones, and its eyes, God, its eyes were the worst part. They weren't empty or hollow like I expected. They were bright, gleaming with a kind of malice, like it enjoyed every second of our terror. It took a step toward us, dragging its hand along the wall as it moved. The sound of its nails scratching the plaster was deafening in the silence. And then it spoke. "You shouldn't have asked." The voice was low and rasping, like it hadn't spoken in decades. We didn't wait to hear anything else. We ran, straight out the front door and into the car, leaving the house, our belongings, everything behind. We haven't gone back since. We called the landlord and told him we were breaking the lease, and he didn't even try to argue. It was like he knew, like he expected it. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that leaving the house put everything behind us. But sometimes, late at night, Megan and I both hear it. The scratching. It comes from inside the walls, no matter where we are. Her parents' house, a hotel, even my brother's place where we've been crashing. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I swear I hear that soft, breathy laugh again, like it's waiting for us to come back. We thought leaving the house would put an end to all of it. We were wrong. At first, we stayed at my brother's place, thinking if we got far enough away, the thing, whatever it was, would lose interest. But even in a new place, with new walls, the scratching found us. The first night, it was faint, just a few soft, dragging noises inside the walls. Megan and I tried to tell ourselves it was just an old house settling, that we were imagining things after everything that had happened. But we weren't. It followed us. By the second night, the noises grew louder, and then the shadows started. Every time we turned off the lights, we'd catch flickers of movement out of the corners of our eyes. They'd be gone as soon as we looked directly at them, but we knew. It was still with us. And then came the whispers. At first, it was just my name, quiet and far off, like someone calling to me from another room. Then it started calling Megan's name too, soft, sing-song whispers that always came at the worst moments, right as we were drifting off to sleep, or when one of us was home alone. We tried everything. We burned sage, we scattered salt at every doorway and window. Megan even tried calling a psychic she found online, but that didn't help either. The scratching got worse. The shadows grew darker. The thing was getting closer, and no amount of candles or crystals was going to stop it. One night, I woke up to the sound of Megan crying. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands, rocking back and forth. I sat up and reached for her, but the second my hand touched her shoulder, she jerked away like I'd burned her. "It's not going to stop," she whispered. "We let it out. We let it out." I didn't know what to say. She was right. Deep down, I knew that too. The thing wasn't tied to the house. It wasn't tied to the basement or the Ouija board. It was tied to us. The last straw came a few days later. Megan had gone out to grab groceries, and I was sitting alone in the living room, scrolling through my phone to distract myself from the creeping sense of dread that followed me everywhere now. That's when I heard it again. The laugh. It started as a low chuckle, coming from the far corner of the room. I whipped my head around, expecting to see something standing there, but there was nothing. Just the shadows gathering along the edges of the room, thick and heavy like smoke. Then the temperature dropped. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I could see my breath clouding in the air. It was the same feeling I'd had back in the house, the weight in the air, the cold pressing in around me. I stood up slowly, heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw it. At the edge of the room, just barely visible in the dim light, something crawled out of the shadows. It wasn't standing this time. It was hunched low to the ground, its limbs too long, its body contorted in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Its head was tilted, just like before, and those awful, gleaming eyes locked onto mine. It smiled, and then it spoke, in that same raspy, broken voice. "I told you. You shouldn't have asked." I ran out of the apartment and didn't stop until I was halfway down the block. I called Megan, told her not to come back, told her we were done trying to fight this thing. She didn't argue. I think she knew, just like I did, that there was only one way this was going to end. We drove all night, no destination in mind. We just had to get away. But no matter how far we went, the scratching stayed with us. It was in the car, under the dashboard, inside the vents. And the worst part? Every time I glanced at the rearview mirror, I saw it, just for a second. A pale face grinning at me from the back seat. Then it would vanish, like it was playing a game. We kept driving. Days turned into weeks, and we stayed in cheap motels, crashing on friends' couches, never staying in one place for more than a night. But it didn't matter where we went, it always found us. Last night was the breaking point. We were staying at a tiny roadside motel, and Megan had finally managed to fall asleep. I sat by the window, staring out into the dark parking lot, trying to figure out what the hell we were supposed to do. And then I felt it again, that shift in the air. I turned around, and there it was, standing in the doorway to the bathroom. This time, it was close enough for me to see its face, if you could call it a face. Its skin was stretched too tight over its skull, and its mouth was too wide, filled with jagged, broken teeth. It tilted its head, like it was studying me. Then it leaned forward and whispered, so softly I almost didn't hear it. "Nowhere is safe." That's when I knew. There's no escaping it. We let something out that night with the Ouija board, and it's never going to leave us alone. It doesn't want anything. It's not here to haunt us or scare us away. It's here to stay. We're still driving. As I write this, we're heading out of state, hoping, praying that if we just keep moving, we can outrun it. But deep down, I know the truth. It's always one step behind us. And if you're reading this, I need you to listen carefully. Don't ask the questions we did. Don't try to know what you're not supposed to know. Because once you ask, once you let it in, it won't stop. Not ever. And if one night you hear scratching inside your walls, don't listen. And whatever you do, don't look. The Ouija board told me not to open the door. Someone is knocking every night at 3 a.m. All right, so I don't usually post stuff like this, but I seriously need to get this off my chest. This whole thing started about 2 weeks ago, and I swear on my life, it's been messing with me in ways I can't even explain. I'm not saying I believe in ghosts or demons or anything like that, but this feels different. It feels wrong. So, let me back up and give you some context. My friends and I were having a chill night at my apartment. Just beers, video games, the usual. Around 11 p.m, someone, I think it was Nick, got the genius idea to pull out a Ouija board he found at a flea market. Yeah, I know. The typical stupid horror movie setup, right? But honestly, we didn't think much of it. We were just bored and thought it would be funny. It wasn't one of those fancy wooden boards either, just a cheap plastic one with faded letters and a planchette that looked like it had been through some stuff. So there we were, all gathered around the coffee table like a bunch of idiots, candles flickering, dim lights, setting the mood. I wasn't taking it seriously at all. I mean, I'd used a Ouija board once when I was a kid, and nothing happened except a bunch of fake gasps and pushing the planchette around. I figured this time wouldn't be any different. But it was. It really was. At first, it was the usual crap. We asked if anyone was there, and the planchette moved a bit. We all accused each other of pushing it, laughing and cracking jokes. Then it started to spell out weird answers. Like, we asked what its name was, and it just wrote KNOCK. That's when the energy in the room shifted. You ever have one of those moments where the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, and the air feels heavier, like something is watching you? Yeah, it was like that. The laughter kind of died down, but we kept going, pretending like it was no big deal. We asked it what it wanted, and it spelled, "Do not open the door." Now at this point, I was 90% sure Nick or my buddy Jason was messing with us, but the thing is, they swore they weren't. And I know these guys, they definitely try to scare me, but they aren't exactly subtle. This felt different. It felt like whatever was answering us wasn't in the room with us. It was somewhere else, somewhere close. I tried to break the awkward silence by asking a stupid question. What door? I expected the planchette to just spell out some nonsense, or maybe even stop moving entirely. Instead, it moved again, slow but deliberate. It spelled, "Your door." Everyone froze. My apartment door? I live alone, on the 3rd floor of a fairly average building in the suburbs. It's a quiet neighborhood, no weirdos or break-ins or anything like that. At least, not until recently. But I'll get to that part soon. I told the guys that it was probably nothing, just the board messing with us. Nick looked pale though, and Jason kept glancing over at my front door. I could tell they were spooked, but we tried to laugh it off and moved on to other questions. The planchette slowed down after that, barely answering, until we asked the last question of the night. What happens if I open the door? The planchette shot across the board and spelled, as fast as it could, "You will let it in." Now, I don't know if it was the alcohol or just the weird vibe in the room, but we stopped right there. Jason pushed the planchette off the board, saying we shouldn't mess with this stuff. I rolled my eyes, but honestly, I was glad he stopped it. Something about the whole thing made my stomach churn. We packed up the board, turned on some music, and tried to laugh it off. After about 20 minutes, the weird tension kind of faded, and things felt normal again. They left around 1 a.m., and I just crashed on the couch, figuring that would be the end of it. It wasn't. I woke up around 3:07 a.m. that night. At first, I didn't think much of it. I've always had weird sleep patterns. But as soon as I sat up, I heard it. 3 distinct knocks on my apartment door. Knock, knock, knock. I remember sitting there for a second, half awake, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, like someone was deliberately waiting between each one. Now, here's the thing. My building has this weird echo effect, so sometimes it's hard to tell if a sound is coming from inside or outside. I figured maybe it was the neighbors, but the sound was so clear, so precise. I knew it was coming from my door. I grabbed my phone, still groggy, and checked the time. 3:09 a.m. I didn't even think about the Ouija board at that point. It was just one of those weird 3 a.m. moments where everything feels kind of surreal. I got up, shuffled to the door, and checked the peephole. Nothing. Just the empty hallway, dimly lit by the crappy overhead light. I stood there for a second, heart thudding in my chest, waiting to see if someone would walk by or knock again. But no one did. I stood there for what felt like 5 minutes, just staring at the door. Eventually, I shrugged it off, figuring it was probably just some drunk neighbor messing around, Or maybe a dream I'd half woken from. I went back to bed, and that was the end of it. Or so I thought. So after that first night, I didn't think much of it. I mean, weird stuff happens sometimes, right? Maybe I was dreaming, maybe someone knocked and ran off. I convinced myself it was nothing. But then, the next night came. I went to bed at a decent time, around midnight, and everything seemed normal. No creepy feelings, no eerie vibes, just me scrolling my phone until I fell asleep. But then, I woke up again. Same thing. I blinked, looked at my phone, 3:03 a.m., and then it happened. Knock, knock, knock. Same pattern, same exact sound as the night before. Slow, even, almost polite. Like whoever was on the other side wasn't in a rush. They knew I'd hear them. I shot straight up in bed this time. My heart was racing, and the back of my neck felt clammy, like I'd been caught in the middle of a bad dream. I didn't know why, but something about those knocks felt wrong, like they didn't belong here. I lay there, frozen, staring toward the front of the apartment. I live alone, no roommates, no pets, and the building's security isn't amazing, but you can't get inside unless someone lets you in, especially at that time of night. I sat there, straining to hear anything else. Footsteps, shuffling, maybe a door creaking somewhere down the hall, but nothing. Just this weird, suffocating silence. I grabbed my phone, opened my apartment's security app, and pulled up the camera feed for the hallway. There's a small camera above the entrance door to the building, and it gives a half-decent view of the hall outside my apartment. Nothing. Just the flickering, dim hallway light, and that same awful stillness. And yet, someone had just knocked. I wasn't about to go open the door. No way. I remembered the Ouija board and what it had spelled. Do not open the door. Yeah, I know it sounds dumb, but in that moment, I kept hearing those words in my head, like a warning on loop. I told myself, just wait it out. Whoever it is will go away. I stayed in bed, trying to steady my breathing, feeling every second stretch longer and longer. And just when I thought maybe the knocking had been in my head, knock, knock, knock. I swear to God, my whole body went cold. I could feel this sickening knot in my stomach, like whatever was on the other side of the door wasn't just a person trying to mess with me. It felt like something else, something that didn't belong in the world I knew. And the worst part? I checked the camera again. Still no one there. I sat there, paralyzed, as the seconds ticked by. 3 minutes passed, then 5. No more knocks came, but I knew something was still out there. I could feel it, like this heavy pressure in the air, almost like the walls were closing in around me. I tried to go back to sleep, but it wasn't happening. I stayed in bed, wide awake, until the sun came up. When the light finally spilled in through the blinds, the whole thing felt ridiculous. I thought, maybe someone really was knocking, and I just missed them on the camera. Or maybe it was some weird coincidence like pipes banging or a draft making noise against the door. But then it happened again the next night. Every night, same time. It didn't matter what time I went to bed. It didn't matter if I left the TV on or played music while I slept. At exactly 3 a.m., sometimes 3:01, sometimes 3:05, it would happen. 3 knocks. Always 3. Knock, knock, knock. By night 4, I was seriously losing it. I hadn't slept more than a couple of hours, and every time the knocks came, I got that same awful feeling, like something was just waiting for me to make a mistake. I started double locking the door, putting the chain on, checking the camera every time it happened, and still, there was no one. What really messed with me, though, was the timing. It was always the same, and it was never louder or softer, just those 3 deliberate, even knocks, like whoever, or whatever, was on the other side, knew exactly how to get my attention. I talked to my buddies about it. Nick thought I was messing with him, and Jason said it was probably some prank. Just wait it out, they told me. It'll stop. But it didn't stop. And the longer it went on, the more I started noticing other weird stuff. The things I noticed. It wasn't just the knocking. Other things started to happen around my apartment. Things that made me question if I was losing it. Like, one night I woke up to find every single one of my cabinet doors wide open. Another night, my phone's alarm went off at exactly 3 a.m., even though I never set an alarm. And then there were the shadows. I started seeing them in the corners of my apartment, just out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was just my brain playing tricks on me from lack of sleep. But these shadows, they weren't normal. They didn't move like shadows should. They would stretch across the walls, long and thin, even when there was no light to cast them. And sometimes, just for a second, I could swear they looked like a figure standing perfectly still, watching me. I tried everything to make it stop. I even saged the place, thinking maybe there was some lingering energy from the Ouija board session. But it didn't help. In fact, it seemed to make things worse. The knocks started coming twice a night. And then, about a week in, something happened that I still can't explain. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through Instagram, trying to stay awake so I wouldn't have to deal with whatever was going on at 3 a.m. That's when I heard it. Not a knock. Something else. Scraping. It was faint at first, like nails dragging across wood. I froze, listening. It was coming from the other side of the front door. Then came the knocking. Knock, knock, knock. Except this time, the knocking didn't stop. It just kept going. And the scraping got louder. I sat there, my heart racing, too scared to even look at the door. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and checked the camera feed. And that's when I saw it. There was still no one there, but the hallway light. It had started flickering. And then, just as the knocking stopped, something flickered across the screen. For a split second, I swear, I saw a figure standing just out of frame. Tall, thin, and hunched, with long arms that didn't look right. It wasn't there long enough for me to get a good look, but I know what I saw. And whatever it wasn't human. The knocking stopped after that, but it didn't make me feel better. Because now I know, it's not just knocking to get in. It's waiting for me to open the door. I thought I could outlast it. I really did. Just wait it out long enough, and whatever was happening would stop on its own. But I was wrong. It wasn't going to stop. At least, not until I did exactly what it wanted. And the worst part? I didn't even realize it was playing me the entire time. Let me tell you how it happened. By this point, I was running on fumes. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, and every little noise in my apartment felt like a warning. The knocking had become this twisted ritual. Every night at 3 a.m., like clockwork. Knock, knock, knock. It didn't matter if I ignored it. It didn't matter if I stood right by the door, watching through the peephole. There was never anyone there, and yet, it kept coming. Then the knocking changed. It was subtle at first. One night, it was faster, more insistent. Knock, knock, knock. Like whoever, or whatever, was on the other side was starting to lose patience. Another night, it was softer, almost like it was tapping with fingertips. Then the scraping noises started again. They came in bursts, right after the knocks, like claws dragging across the wood. But what really got me? The voice. It was around 3:04 a.m. when I first heard it. I was standing by the door with my phone in hand, ready to record anything that happened. The knocks came, like always. I stared through the peephole. No one. Same dim hallway, same flickering light. Then I heard it. So soft I thought I imagined it. Let me in. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't angry. It was gentle, almost polite, like someone asking to borrow sugar or check their mail. But there was something off about it. The voice didn't sound quite human, like it was trying to copy how people sound but couldn't get it right. It sent this wave of cold through my whole body, like ice water running through my veins. I stepped back from the door, heart hammering in my chest, trying not to panic. I stood there for what felt like forever, waiting for it to happen again. Let me in. It was closer this time, like it was leaning right against the other side of the door. I could hear it breathing between the words. This slow, raspy inhale, like the thing on the other side didn't quite understand how lungs are supposed to work. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I just backed away, slowly, as if moving too fast would somehow draw it in. I remember thinking, this isn't real. This can't be real. But deep down, I knew it was. I could feel it in my bones. I spent the rest of the night curled up on the couch, clutching a kitchen knife like that would somehow make a difference. The knocking didn't come again that night, but the voice stayed with me. I could still hear it, faint and distant, as if it was lingering just outside the walls of my apartment. The package. The next morning, I tried to pretend everything was normal. I had to. I was exhausted, my brain was fried, and I was starting to lose track of what was real and what wasn't. I went about my day in a daze, trying to shake off the fog in my head. That's when I found the package. It was sitting right outside my front door, perfectly centered on the doormat. Just a small, plain cardboard box with no label, no return address, nothing. It wasn't there the night before. That much I was sure of. I stood there, staring at it, my skin crawling. There was no reason for me to get a package. I hadn't ordered anything, and none of my friends had mentioned sending me anything. It was just there. I knew I shouldn't touch it. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to leave it alone, but I couldn't. I don't know why. I just couldn't. Something about that box felt important, like it was meant for me, like it was part of whatever game this thing was playing. I reached down, hands shaking, and picked it up. It was light, too light, like there was almost nothing inside. I brought it inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened it. Inside was a key. It was old, rusted, with jagged edges and a long, thin shaft. It looked like the kind of key that would belong to an ancient lock, the kind you'd find in some abandoned house or forgotten chest. There was no note, no explanation, just the key, sitting there on a bed of crumpled black paper. And the second I touched it, the air in the room shifted. It felt colder, heavier, like the walls were closing in again. I knew that whatever was on the other side of my door wanted me to use that key. The next night, I should have thrown the key away. I should have burned it, buried it, done anything except keep it. But I didn't. I left it on the coffee table, and I spent the entire day trying to convince myself it was just some prank. Maybe Nick was messing with me, and he'd planted the key to freak me out. Maybe it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. That night, I didn't even bother going to bed. I sat on the couch, staring at the clock, waiting for 3 a.m. to roll around. I knew it was coming. I could feel it, like this pressure building in the room, squeezing tighter and tighter as the minutes ticked by. Then, right on time, knock, knock, knock. I stared at the door, heart pounding, sweat trickling down my spine. The key was still sitting on the coffee table, glinting under the dim light of the lamp. I knew what it wanted, and then I heard it again. "Let me in." The voice was clearer this time, closer, more familiar somehow, like it was trying to mimic someone I knew. I grabbed the key without thinking. My hand closed around it, and the second I did, the air seemed to hum, like the whole apartment was holding its breath. I stood up, my legs trembling, and took a step toward the door. The voice came again, softer this time. "Please, let me in." I raised the key, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Something in the back of my mind screamed at me to stop, but I couldn't. I was caught in this awful trance, like my body wasn't even mine anymore. I reached for the lock, and that's when I saw it, through the peephole. It was just a glimpse, but it was enough to stop me cold. A face, twisted, pale, with eyes that were far too large, and a mouth that stretched too wide, like someone had taken a human face and stretched it over something else, something that didn't belong. I stumbled back, dropping the key. My chest tightened, and my vision blurred. The knocking stopped, but the voice, it started laughing. I didn't sleep after that. I sat on the floor, my back pressed against the wall, staring at the door like it might burst open any second. I wanted to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing, that the voice, the knocks, that face I saw through the peephole, none of it was real. But it was real. I could still feel the weight of the key in my hand, like it had left an invisible imprint on my skin. And the laughter, it hadn't been loud, but it had this sharp, cutting quality, like it knew a joke that I didn't. I didn't know what else to do. I called Nick, woke him up at 4 a.m., desperate for someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. He answered, groggy and annoyed, but when I started explaining what had been happening, he went dead silent on the other end of the line. When I got to the part about the key, he finally spoke, his voice low and serious. Dude, you didn't use the key, right? Number no, of course not, I whispered, glancing at the door again, as if saying it too loud might change that. Good. He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath. Listen to me. Don't open the door, no matter what. You need to get rid of that key. Burn it, throw it in a river, just get it the hell away from you. I wanted to believe it was that simple. I really did. But somehow I knew it wasn't. Because the knocking wasn't just outside the door anymore. The sound moves. The next night, I didn't bother going to bed. I sat on the couch, clutching a baseball bat, my eyes glued to the front door. I had the lights on, every single one in the apartment, because somehow the darkness felt dangerous, like it could swallow me if I let it. At exactly 3 a.m., the knocking started. Except this time, it wasn't coming from the front door. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. It was coming from inside the apartment. I turned slowly, my heart in my throat. The sound was coming from the kitchen cabinets, those same cabinets that had opened by themselves a few nights ago. One by one, I heard them knock. Soft, deliberate taps, like someone was rapping their knuckles against the wood. I stared, too terrified to move. Then the fridge door knocked. 3 taps, evenly spaced. The air in the apartment grew thick, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I could feel something in the room with me, even though I couldn't see it. And then the closet door knocked. Knock, knock, knock. It was mocking me, repeating that same pattern, moving from place to place as if to say, you can't escape me, I'm already here. I grabbed my phone and opened the security app, my hands trembling so badly, it took me a few tries to tap the right buttons. The hallway camera feed loaded, and that's when I saw it. The shape in the hallway. At first, the hallway was empty. Same flickering overhead light. Same stillness. But then, in the bottom corner of the screen, I saw it. A shadow. It wasn't standing like a person. It was hunched over, impossibly thin, with long limbs that dragged against the floor. I could only see part of it, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. The shape moved slowly, deliberately, dragging itself just out of the camera's view. I sat there, paralyzed, phone clutched in my hands, watching the screen like a lifeline. And then the screen went black. Not the whole phone, just the camera feed. 1 second, the hallway was there, and the next, nothing. Just darkness. And that's when I heard the front door chain rattle. The chain comes off. I shot up from the couch, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. The chain on the front door was moving, scraping against the metal frame, like something was trying to pull it loose from the inside. I backed away, clutching the baseball bat, my entire body trembling. And then, slowly, the chain slipped free, The door didn't open right away. It just sat there, slightly ajar, a thin sliver of darkness peeking through. I stood frozen, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run. But I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. And then the door swung open, just an inch. Something moved in the gap, a pale, thin hand, with long fingers that bent at strange angles. The fingers curled against the doorframe, tapping gently 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. I felt something in the room shift, like the air itself had turned against me. My skin prickled and my vision blurred, but I kept my eyes locked on the door. And that's when I heard it again. Let me in. But this time, the voice wasn't outside the door. It was right behind me. The thing that knows your name. I didn't think, I just ran. I bolted out of the apartment, leaving the door swinging wide open behind me. I flew down the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet, and burst out into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I reached the parking lot, gasping for breath, my heart slamming against my ribs. I looked back up at my apartment window, and that's when I saw it. There was a figure standing in the window, tall, thin, and horribly still. Its face was pressed against the glass, pale and stretched, just like what I'd seen through the peephole. Its eyes were too wide, too empty, like it was wearing someone else's skin. And its mouth was moving. Even from the parking lot, I could hear it whispering over and over again, "Let me in." I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, watching that thing whisper my doom. But then I saw it raise one hand, those long bent fingers, and point down at me. And in that moment, I knew. It wasn't done with me yet. I don't know how to explain what's been happening since I ran out of the apartment. I've been crashing at different places. Nick's house one night, Jason's the next. But it doesn't matter. Everywhere I go, it follows. It started with the knocks. At first, I thought I was safe if I left my place, but the knocks came no matter where I was staying. Always at 3 a.m. Always 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. The first time it happened at Nick's place, he thought I was joking. I dragged him out of bed, made him stand by the door with me. We waited, barely breathing. And when the knocks came again, his face went pale. He opened the door, because of course Nick is an idiot, and no one was there. Just the empty street, the hum of the streetlights, and the cold night air creeping in through the doorway. "It's not a prank, Nick," I whispered. "It's real." He didn't say anything after that, but he believed me. I could see it in his eyes. The phone call. The worst part wasn't the knocks, though. The worst part was when it called me. I was staying at Jason's that night. We thought maybe it wouldn't follow if I didn't tell anyone where I was. I turned my phone off, locked the bedroom door, and even tried blasting music through headphones to drown out the sounds. But at 3:03 a.m., Jason's phone rang. I saw him sit up in bed, groggy and confused. "Who the hell is calling me right now?" he muttered. He reached for his phone and squinted at the screen. Then he froze, his face draining of colour. Dude," he whispered, holding the phone out to me. "Why is your number calling me?" My stomach dropped. My phone was off. It was right there, sitting on the nightstand, dark and silent. But somehow, my number was on his screen. He hesitated, thumb hovering over the answer button. "Should I?" "No." I grabbed his hand before he could answer, and that's when the knocks came. Knock, knock, knock. We both sat perfectly still, staring at the bedroom door. The knocking wasn't coming from the front door of Jason's apartment. It was coming from the other side of the bedroom door, just a few feet away from where we sat. And then my phone, the one that was turned off, started vibrating. I picked it up, and my heart almost stopped. There was a message on the screen. Just one word: open. The final knock. We didn't sleep that night. At sunrise, I left Jason's place and went back to my apartment. I don't know why. Maybe part of me thought I could end this if I went back to where it all started. Maybe I just wanted it to be over, one way or another. The key was still on the coffee table, right where I'd left it. The apartment felt different, like it was waiting for me. I stared at the front door, my hands shaking. I knew what it wanted. It had been telling me the same thing from the start. Open the door. I picked up the key. It felt heavier this time, almost warm, like it was pulsing in my hand. And then I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. The voice followed, soft and familiar. Let me in. But this time, it wasn't just mimicking someone I knew. It was my own voice. It was like listening to a recording of myself from the other side of the door, begging to be let in. The sound made my skin crawl, my head spin. I could feel something shifting behind that door, something ancient, patient, and hungry. I don't know how long I stood there, holding the key. Time felt strange, like it was slipping through my fingers. The walls seemed to pulse around me, closing in tighter and tighter, until there was nothing left but the door and the knocking. And that's when I realized it was never about keeping something out. The knocking wasn't trying to get in. It was trying to get me to open the door and let it out. The door opens. I wish I could say I fought it. I wish I could tell you that I threw the key away, that I ran and never looked back. But I didn't. I was too tired, too broken. And maybe some part of me wanted to know what was behind the door. So I unlocked it. The second the key turned in the lock, the air in the apartment changed. It was like every sound in the world vanished at once. No hum from the fridge, no cars outside, not even the sound of my own breathing. Just silence. And then the door swung open. There was nothing on the other side, just darkness. A vast, endless void that seemed to stretch on forever. It wasn't the hallway. It wasn't even a place. It was nothingness. And in the center of that nothingness, something moved. I can't describe it. Not really. It was too big, too wrong, like it didn't belong in this world or any other. It was a shape, a shadow, and 1,000 faces all at once. And as it shifted toward me, I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like my soul was being pulled out of my body. And then it smiled. It didn't have a mouth, but it smiled. I felt it. Like the universe itself was grinning at me, amused by my stupidity. I tried to scream, but the sound died in my throat. And then the thing spoke, in my voice. Thank you for letting me out. The aftermath. I don't remember much after that. I must have blacked out, because when I woke up, the door was closed and the key was gone. The apartment looked the same as before, everything in its place, nothing out of the ordinary. But the air was different, lighter, like whatever had been trapped inside was finally free. I moved out the next day, packed my stuff and left without looking back. I couldn't stay there, not after what I'd seen. But the thing is, the knocking hasn't stopped. It follows me, no matter where I go. Always at 3 a.m., always 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. And now sometimes, I hear my own voice on the other side of the door. Let me in. I know better than to answer. I know better than to open the door. But some nights, when the knocking is soft, gentle, and familiar, I get tempted. Because the worst part, some nights I wonder if it's really me on the other side, and if I was the one who got out, what did I leave behind?